Hello, today we're going to be looking at the nuts and bolts activity. We did this in class on a block day, and we turned this activity in the same day that we did it. So if you were absent, you will need to email me this one directly. There's not another spot to turn it in on Google Classrooms. Before proceeding, please make sure you have a copy of the Chapter 1 Lab Nuts and Bolts activity. This should be uploaded to Google Classroom. Go ahead and essentially do the front page. This took us a few minutes in class. Let's go ahead and pause the video at this point, do the front page, do the 4 pre-lab questions, and look at the definitions. Use your textbook as necessary. Pause the video at this time until you get all of those questions done. Once you have all of those questions done and you feel comfortable with those definitions, what we're going to explore in this activity is the difference between an element and a compound, as question number 1 implies, and we will also explore the difference between a pure substance and a mixture, as question 3 is referring to. Several of our definitions are listed. This activity is primarily from section 1-2. There might be some other things from throughout chapter 1 as well. 2 definitions that aren't on questions 1 through 4 are the difference between a homogeneous and heterogeneous mixture. I'll actually talk about that on the kitchen chemistry activity in a little bit more detail. Okay, so today's exploration, what we did, we're talking about elements, molecules, compounds, atoms, things that we cannot see. One of the things that we have to do in chemistry is learn to use models. So what we're going to do in this activity is we're going to use combinations of nuts and bolts and washers to help us represent atoms and elements and molecules and compounds. So for instance, if I have a single nut, I can think of this as a hydrogen atom, or so this would be an element. If I have 2 of them, that would be 2 different hydrogen atoms. And so what I would have here would be an example of a pure element, because I have nothing. It's pure because I only have one thing, and it's an element because all I have is hydrogens. If I think about this 1 bolt, I can think about this as, for instance, an oxygen atom. Now, as soon as I do this, think about for a second what this would represent. And what you hopefully can notice is that I have 2 of what I called my hydrogen atoms bonded to 1 oxygen atom. And if I think of that in chemistry terms, I can think of this as H2O, in other words, water. So what this represents is a compound. In our case, in this model, the molecule water, H2O, because I have more than one element bonded together. So that's what we're going to be looking at with these. Each little bag that you're going to get in ready to see is going to have some sort of combination of nuts and bolts and washers. Let's go ahead, and if you look at page 2 of the handout, there's going to be 12 of these. They'll be labeled A through L. One benefit you have is they will go in alphabetical order. But yeah, if you look at the expiration procedure, there are 5 different options. You will see all 5 eventually. You can have a pure element, a pure compound, a mixture of elements, a mixture of compounds, or finally you can have a mixture of both elements and compounds. Now, as you're going through these, I would encourage you, especially on the first 1 or 2, to kind of break it down into 2 separate questions. And again, this goes back to the front page with our definitions. The first question to ask yourself is, are you looking at an element or are you looking at a compound? Or potentially, are you looking at both elements and compounds? The second question to ask yourself is similar to question 3. Do you find yourself, are you looking at a pure substance or are you looking at a mixture? And then if you combine those 2 questions, you should be able to come up with a conclusion of one of those 5 options. Again, pure element, pure compound, mixture of elements, mixture of compounds, or a mixture of compounds and elements. What I'm going to do here for the next few minutes is I will bring the bags across kind of one at a time. I'll try to get it where you can see. This might take me a second, so forgive me if this is a little bit awkward. But I'll try to get it where you can see what's in there. So I can see what's in this bag. And again, your question then, 2 separate questions. Is it pure or is it a mixture? Second question would be, do I have elements or do I have compounds or both of those things? And hopefully you can see what's in there. This one, for instance, I can tell you kind of easily. There are 4 bolts in there. So this is sample A. I will pass these by for a few seconds at a time. Feel free to pause the video as needed if you need a little bit of time if I go a little bit too fast. So this is sample A. This is definitely easier to do in person. So try to do the best you can. For instance, this is 3 nuts and 3 bolts. Everything separate. And the last one, whatever that is in the corner, is rest. Okay, so those are our 12 samples. Again, feel free to pause those. Again, this is some that I can just tell by looking quickly at this video that some of them you can tell pretty well on the video, and some of them are a little bit difficult to tell over the video exactly what's in there. And so don't hesitate to pause on those to zoom in or whatever to see those as well as you can. Okay, so in your data table on the back page, you should have all 12 of those filled out. If you feel pretty comfortable with this, go ahead and do the post-lab questions as well. Again, that might be a little bit of a challenge. If you didn't feel comfortable with these by the time you got done, then sit tight on the post lab for just a little bit. What I hope you found, and what I hope you experienced, students that were here in class, it was very, very common to be uncomfortable with the first one or two of these samples that students did. What I hope you found is that by the time you got to the last two or three, you were hopefully starting to feel pretty comfortable with them. If so, you can look at the post-lab questions, and instead of nuts, bolts, washers, it's circles, triangles, squares, etc., but a very similar concept. I also wanted to show you those post-lab questions to explain on when we do labs and activities, how you can expect to be assessed on these at some point. A lab and activities that we do in class, this is a time for learning. It's a time to make mistakes and to learn from those mistakes. But when we have our first test in a week or so, you will be assessed on something very similar to what we do in our laboratories and activities. And those post-lab questions are an excellent example of what that assessment would look like for this particular activity. So if you feel comfortable with it, go ahead and try the post-lab questions as well before you submit this. Again, for this assignment, we actually turned this in class. For those of you that were absent, you will need to scan this and email it to me directly, since there is not a spot for this on Google Classrooms. If you have any questions on this, let me know. Again, if you have any major questions, best thing, frankly, would be to complete the data table, and then I will correct that for you so that you can go back and look at anything that you possibly missed. And that concludes the nuts and bolts activity. Thank you.